My interest to study Antarctica was around 2014 when Colombia started the first scientific expedition developed by the government to be there, down there in south, to make research. And since then, since 2014, I have been helping, Colombia and different projects that have been developing there. With the oceanographic point of view. My favorite memories, I guess, that was once in Greenland when our summer research was, delayed because the logistics, as I already mentioned, is quite complicated, and we've been there in October.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Climate Converse podcast. It's a podcast channel where we talk about the world as it is and the world as it could be. Today, we have a special guest with us, Dr. Jhon Mojica. I know John for several years. John is a senior research associate at NOAA, Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Laboratory. He specializes in the complex dynamics between ocean mixing and ice sheet stability, and he has been on several expeditions. So, John, very welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Mainak, for the invitation. I'm happy to talk about these different topics.
Yeah. So, John, I have known you for like, I don't know, 5, 6 years, even
Yeah, like
more.
6 years,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, if you could tell our viewers how you ended up working in the field of oceanography and how you are motivated.
Again, hello everyone. Something quite curious from my side. I was born and grew up in Bogota, Colombia, that is a city that is in the mountains. We are so high in the mountains, and the ocean sometimes it's quite far. In my time, more than 1 hour, a flight there, or even 24 hours driving. So I don't know if I feel the ocean so far that I want to try to get closer to that. So that's why I rise my interest to reach that area and to know more about that. My bachelor degree, was in physics. So that topic allowed me to have a broader point of view of all the research that can be performed in that way. So a lot of
Mhm. So you have been to, I guess, if I'm not wrong, at least 7 expeditions.
Talking about Antarctica, yes. Oceanography. I started my path to oceanography. Just checking all the different oceans around the world. But yes, something that raised my interest to study Antarctica was around 2014 when Colombia started the first scientific expedition developed by the government to be there, down there in south, to make research. And since then, since 2014, I have been helping, Colombia and different projects that have been developing there with the oceanographic point of view, trying, even for a country that is around the Ecuador, to understand what are the patterns of the circulation and how the the areas far away as Antarctica and even Greenland can impact us, in tropical areas such as Colombia. Of course, as I mentioned in 2014, I started my research, my path in the south part, but also was when I joined NYU around 2017 when I started to develop some research in the northern part in Greenland. So
Right.
if I combine all the expeditions south, north, at the north I have been 4 times, and at the south, same 4 times, I guess. Yeah.
I think uh, all the viewers out there, very few of them would get a chance to visit the the poles of Earth, both in Antarctica and in Greenland. So, if we could tell our viewer, how does it feel like to be at the pole, to be at the in that super cold, icy, like lands?
Well, of course, it's a logistically challenge to be in those areas. We used to perform, research during the summer, even at the south or the northern part, Greenland or Antarctica, to get a better oceanographic conditions and atmospheric conditions. In the south, for example, just to allow us the boat, the vessel, just to reach different areas that doesn't gonna be covered full of ice. Otherwise, we cannot move. Um, is somebody described it as a desert because there's no water, in a liquid state over there. Everything is frozen, so that's why it's quite astonished just to see all the wide areas as far as you can see, and
Out,
it's interesting. It's quite nice.
out of all the expeditions you've been on, what's the most striking experience you have, and what memory you would cherish?
Well, one of my favorite memories, I guess, that was once in Greenland when our summer research was, delayed because the logistics, as I already mentioned, is quite complicated, and we've been there in October. So at that point, at the end of
Which year
October,
was it?
it was in 2018, 2019. October
Okay.
2019, I've been there. And I remember that the day was quite short, and at night I got the opportunity to see the northern lights.
Wow.
All these patterns of lights in the sky. Wow, marvelous.
So November means it's quite late for Northern Hemisphere, right? Because it's winter. So where were you in November, and what kind of data or research were you doing that time?
Well, in general, the research that we have been performing there, was with the support of NYU, was to trying to identify patterns of circulation and the analysis of the apignal mixing,
So
in
if you
front
could
of
break it
different
down for
glaciers.
the viewer, like in a
Yes,
simpler language.
it's something that we can identify. The water that we can see in the ocean is not the same. All the water that is just in the surface to the bottom. All the water has different, stratification related with the amount of salt or temperature that we have. And all the water, of course, move in a different way. And if we can identify, for example, here, the glaciers that we can see, from the movies or whatever, we can see, okay, this is the glacier front, but it's not just this chunk of ice. Below the ocean, there are more glacier front. And if we have water a little bit warmer below, they can start to erode and produce melting in the base of the glacier, producing calving. So I try to study
So
the
calving
different.
means like the chunk of ice is falling from the cliff.
Yes, and I try to identify how the patterns of the circulation, can impact or can increase the rates in which this chunk of ice can be, produce this calving or can be attached to the source of the full ice, just melting in the ocean.
So in 2020, where exactly were you at in Greenland?
No, in 2020, I was already, at that point, I was in Antarctica.
Okay, okay.
Uh,
No, the experience you are talking about, where,
it was in 2019. I was
oh, 2018, sorry.
in Helheim.
Okay, Helheim. Oh.
Helheim, a nice area, you know, still a huge community that you
So
can identify there.
how was the station there? Like where you used to work? Was there multiple like sensors? What kind of sensor you use?
Yes, thanks to our PI or research there, David. In that area, he already have setting different equipment to make research, to look straight to the glacier to identify how is the melting or the movement of the glacier. Yes, can be impacted by the waves of the ocean eroding the glacier in general. But one of my equipment that I was using was some kind of XCTV, that
Mm-hmm.
is an expandable conductivity temperature depth, a sensor that I used to deploy on board of an helicopter, and
Okay.
we have to go around, in the glacier front, looking for a small hole that allow us to drop that zone, and that zone in a real time is connected with a small thin of a copper cable that produce, or more than produce, transmit that data to a modem, well, to a computer, on board of the helicopter. So we search for that hole, we drop the zone and XCTV and XBT, and we can identify the patterns of the temperature, density, salinity in the ocean over the full water column. At that point, something I want to mention, that you think, no, maybe it's quite shallow. No, the point was so deep. I remember
Mm.
in front of the glacier, we have the deep was around 700 meters. That it's
So it's
quite.
around the northeastern part somewhere, right? In Greenland?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I,
Yes, exactly. And we used to deploy around of 10 of those zones, in order to create a pattern to know the distribution of the underwater currents and the circulation, in front of the glacier, that help us or provide us tools to know how is the melting impacting, or even a zero point 0.1 degree Celsius Fahrenheit can impact
mhm.
and increase the melting in the base of the glacier.
Wow. So what was a typical day in Antarctica working in the field be like for a field
Well,
work,
for
field
example,
research? Sorry.
it's quite curious. In Greenland, I got the opportunity to be there once for almost 2 weeks, where I doesn't know the night. Was full sun, the sun just going around and going around. And at the time I was with Brian deploying some, well, buoys with thermometers and microcats and other kind of sensors, in another areas. And I remember that I was refurbishing those ones. Nobody was on the boat. And I say, what's happened with everyone? I look my clock, my watch, and was midnight, and was still the sun there. And I say, no, what I am doing here? I have to go sleep. Yes, it's quite common that you can lose the time sense.
Mm.
So if you want to keep working, you need to take care of yourself, organize your schedules, and try to get rest in order to be, straight and sharp with all the science to perform the next day.
Are you
Yeah.
also involved in like ice core drilling and like setting up a new weather station?
Well, I was part of a group that was in Antarctica, trying to help them, just organizing those ones. I drilled some couple of pancake ice that we
Mhm.
recovered, that was on board of the South African vessel. Yes, and it's not quite easy, to drill a chunk of ice, in
Mhm.
order to get some core. But yes, that was quite interesting and help us, that provide us relevant information just to know about the air that was trapped and the composition of the atmosphere at certain point that help us to know what was the historical, for example, amount of CO2 that we have. That, for example, right now, we have some trend that is a common figure, most common figure about climate variation world, that is the records performed in Hawaii. That is about all this, how we are increasing the CO2 around, and if we can try to go behind those records performed, we have to go to those trapped bubbles of air inside the core of ice that help us to identify the composition of the atmosphere when the ice trap the that piece of that part of the atmosphere, and that
So
help us,
it's
just
like
to create the plots.
an ancient air bubble trapped within ice, and you retrieve that chunk of ice by drilling some hole, and then you analyze what those trapped bubble contains.
Well, yes, exactly. We try to analyze. There is a different team that
Mhm.
perform that kind of analysis. Yes, because of course we have been, focused in different areas. So far, I'm more focused on the oceanographic point of view
Mhm.
about, for example, as I already mentioned it, basically temperature, conductivity, what's happening with the turbidity or the
Mhm.
turbulence in the ocean that can increase the melting in the glacier fronts. But yes, also there are people that study the biological point of view of the chemistry, all
Mhm.
the nutrients that also can impact how uh, how can we see right now the glaciers over there.
Nice. So, I also wanted to ask you, John, like how is the work environment like? How cold is it, and how often do you need to go out? And like, have you encountered with any wild animals, or what what wildlife exposure do you
Yes,
have?
it's quite interesting because uh, I can imagine nowadays the research, oceanographic research, polar research, is at some point fancy. I can say it because you are in a boat, a great boat with heat, AC. You have a stove, the heater there, food, warm food, and of course, there are moments that you have to go outside, take some samples, but you already have several layers, gloves, and all the clothes that you already need to perform or to live in those conditions. But if we can go just no more than 100 years ago, a little bit more, just with Shackleton, all these expeditions with the people from Norway, Amundsen, you can identify that was quite complicated to be in those areas at that time. Right
So
now,
how cold was it? Like what temperature are we talking
well,
about?
no, right now I just have been, the minimum temperature. I don't have to say that because again, I have been there. It's just in summer, have been around minus 10 degrees Celsius, minus 15, 10,
Mm,
15 degrees Celsius over there.
mhm.
I know that there is. I have been in other areas. I remember a trip with a friend here in Minnesota when I have been in minus 28 degrees Celsius. But yes, of course, that was winter. But in Antarctica, I was in minus 15 in
Mm.
summer. But still,
Oh.
we are already with all the
Minus
gear.
15 summer, that's quite a lot.
Yes, it's something. But also we have all the tools that
Mhm.
allow us, to perform the task and the job in the best conditions possible. So
Mhm.
we used to go with a great team. Everyone goes, with focus and great visualization about to perform science. How can we preserve Antarctica, and all the polar areas, in order to decrease our footprint
Mhm.
as a humankind.
Nice, nice. So, uh, over time now, you did significant work on uh, the polar research, and at present, you're also working on the water quality in the Florida coast, right? So, I was
Yes.
wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your recent research and what you're
Well,
interested in.
well, yes, something that research in life is continuous. We used to talk about telecommunications because every single ecosystem in the world is connected. So
Mhm.
everything that happened down there in Antarctica has some repercussions and can be present some impacts here in Miami right now, where I'm living. I'm working here at the University of Miami because there I was studying how the melting rates of the glaciers can impact the, you know, areas or the first line of the sea, in different coastal areas around the world. And here in Miami is one of the areas that are being impacted by the sea level, how the sea level is rising. Now I was checking the rates for the NASA. NASA has some values about how much the sea level is rising every year. And I remember that around 2014, when I started to get focused on the polar areas, the value that they used to talk about was 3.9 millimeters per year. Something 3 millimeters now, almost 10 years later, more than 10 years later, they are talking about even more than 6 millimeters per year. So
So
it's
it's
almost the
literally
double.
doubled.
Almost, yeah, yeah, yeah. So that is increasing, and those are based on satellite data and tide gauge that are located in different locations around the world. It's real
Mhm.
data. It's not a model that can create, something weird. So no, it's real data that are producing that information, and we can identify that just this amount of water every year. Maybe you can think that it's not too much, but can imagine all this around the globe. So
Mhm.
it's huge the amount of water that can impact coastal areas, such as the one cities here in Miami. We're
Mhm.
also on the side that we are increasing the level of the sea, also due to the constructions and the substrate that we have here. That we have coral. That the level of porosity of the coral as a substrate is high. So every time that we have a huge buildings, we are compacting our soil. So the city is getting lower, but the sea level is rising. So all
Mhm.
the salty can impact now. Maybe we doesn't have to. No, we are gonna be floating, drowning. No, but just a little bit more can start to erode. The
Yeah.
basements of the buildings and increase. Gas dangerous of the how you are living in some areas.
Mhm.
So this is one part of the research I'm performing here. What kind
Mhm.
of measures we can take, in order to decrease this kind of rates or impacts, but basically anthropogenic impacts here in the city, and also about the water. How can we preserve the water that we have? And we call it, of course, a water quality. That is quite important to know the water that we are consuming and we have around can tell us something about how is the healthy of our society and the ecosystem that surround us.
Mhm. So how changing water quality can impact the marine ecosystem, because Florida coast has a very rich marine ecosystem. So like, have you seen lately a lot of algae blooms or a lot of other biofouling happening around those regions?
Yes, sadly to say, but yes, these kind of things are happening. And I used to go there twice a month taking water samples, chemistry and oceanographic parameters. Also, we have several oceanographic buoys in another area here in the near the Biscayne Bay that help us to identify these kind of variations. Right now, everything that is happening with the water quality are impacting not just us, as you already mentioned it, just the ecosystem, such as the
Mhm.
coral reef that we have in front. And everything so far, the research, and I'm working a manuscript that is about our footprint. Here in Miami, we have a lot of golf courses, and if you can preserve, if you wanted to preserve all these green, grasses, you need to add nutrients, something phosphorus, nitrates, silicates, and after the water, rain, there is a drain off, and all those nutrients reach the bay. What's happening in
Mhm.
the bay? Of course, you say, well, more nutrients is good for everyone. No, not for everyone, just for some. As you already mentioned it, some algae, of course, they love these kind of nutrients and
Mhm.
start to eat and they start to grow. But what's happened with those algae? They start to produce a bloom that is a huge expansion of those
Mhm.
that can block the sunlight, to the coral reef and the fish and all the other, the seagrass, all the other plants and animals that live in the bottom,
Mhm.
and that produce that even the fish start to move away or the corals die because of the lack of sun, and that start to produce an eutrophic conditions in the area, increasing the nutrients, but the life, there is also lack of oxygen because of the recirculation, and that is a whole chain that can impact the fish that we are gonna eat because it's a
Mhm.
source of food that we have there. But we need to know what are the land source, where those coming from, in order to take measures for us as a scientist and talk with policymakers to say, look, this is happening in these areas. Please take action um, to avoid this problematic in the future. Well, no more in the future, now that is happening.
Mhm. So, John, we are almost at the end of our conversation. So, you as a scientist, what messages would you like to share? And also, if you can also include how you keep yourself motivated in in a uh, in the present research and funding scenario.
Well, first, I guess that as a takeaway, I want to talk with everyone just to try to do your best. Every small step counts. Try to decrease the consumption of water. Of course, there are huge multinational companies but that they consume a lot, but we have to think in ourselves. Uh, Plastics, garbage, trash is going to try to keep in our pocket, throw it in the right place, recycle as much as we can, and try to preserve our environment in every single detail. If we want to go to the ocean, you want to take, oh, look, this is nice, a shell, uh, but instead to take it home, that shell will gonna looks better over there in the ocean. It's gonna
Mhm.
try to keep it there. Maybe we're gonna be the home for another animal, and in that way we can try to keep or preserve the system in the best condition as possible. Because we have to think in the future, in the next generation, we have to try to provide them the best as we can. So that's why we have to try to preserve what we have right now.
Mhm. Well, John, thank you so much for the discussion, and thanks our viewer. and we would be back with another episode.